Everyone good now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we're live. Thank you everyone who's joining. We're gonna give a sec because I think the link probably just went live, and so people are gonna start joining.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I can actually see the viewer count, which is 0 right now. So we'll just give it a minute.
I
um,
seem to be logging in soon, Juliana, so one.
So yeah, I'm Juliana. It's nice to virtually meet you, Kajua, finally. And Liliana is actually right next to me. She will be moderating and monitoring our social media, as I said earlier. And we're really excited to have the both of you. Unfortunately, Juan, like I said, will not be able to join us because due to last minute personal circumstances that doesn't allow him to be here. However, I think we'll still have a very great conversation given who we have on the panel, right? So we're gonna just give it a couple minutes and let people start trickling in because lunchtime, I'm sure people are rushing to their computers. And then we'll get into introductions.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, quick question. I think I know, but what's our hashtag?
It's hashtag JCSHESA chats.
JCSHESA chat. Okay, great.
Yes.
I'm going to tweet a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. So y'all can tweet it out right now too, and maybe people will start joining us. Yeah, so I don't know if either of you have met one another before.
No.
So yeah, I mean, we can also do that. So the reason, like my connection with the both of you is I know Delia, you know, from various circles, and one of my best friends works with her as well. And then Kajua, I know of you as well through Hiram, who is in our cohort and who worked very closely with you while he was at Agnes Scott. So I definitely have Hiram to thank for the connection. And then Juan was actually a connection through Tina. But you know, maybe in another realm, you all will be able to connect.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I'm currently a doctoral student at Loyola University in Chicago. I'm in my first year and second semester. And Liliana.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liliana. I'm a second year in the master's program here at Loyola University for higher education. So super excited to have you guys here.
Yeah, and job searching.
Job searching, look at
Yes.
Great.
We'll give it. So yeah, why don't we just get started? Why don't each of you take time to just tell us about yourself and how have you arrived to where you currently are?
I'll let my colleagues start if you don't, or I can start, either one, Julia.
You can go ahead.
Okay, sure. So currently I'm the interim vice president for student life and dean of students at Agnes Scott College. It is a private liberal arts college historically for women. We affirm great gender diversity here, but we are considered historically a women's college. I have been here about 10 years. I also teach as an adjunct faculty member at two institutions, the University of Georgia, which is about an hour and a half away in Athens. I taught classes on women's college campus environments this semester, but most often, for the last 15 years, I've been adjunct faculty member at Georgia State University, and most recently, in the last 5 years, I've taught critical pedagogy, multicultural education, and interdisciplinary courses through educational policy studies. So critical pedagogy is kind of what I live and breathe, and so it's interesting because I think to self-identify as a critical scholar, particularly when you're a part of an administrative position, is a very different role than identifying as a critical pedagogue or critical scholar and operating in a faculty position. So I think it's really good to have different perspectives. My philosophy is of learning and teaching and education really does come from Bell Hook's critical pedagogy or engaged pedagogy from her book Teaching to Transgress. So I'll stop there, but that's who I am and where I work.
Great, thanks.
And my name is Delia Chung Ham. I am the director of the Asian American Center at Northeastern University in Boston. I've been here for almost 10 years working at Northeastern, and I think, I really view myself as a practitioner about 98% of the time, given my role. I really arrived here, based on my own experience as a college student and really just loving being engaged on campus and finding so much growth, through that process. I always also like to share in my introductions. I'm a mother. I have 3 small children. I don't have a photo close by. There's artwork in the back, but that is also like really important to me because that is part of who I am. And that really does inform some of the ways that I approach what I do. I recently received my doctorate last spring, focusing on higher education and student affairs.
Great, thank you so much. And so kind of jumping off of what Kijua mentioned, right? You mentioned bell hooks. Can you speak to perhaps what other pieces of scholarship or individuals who you really draw from and that inform your work currently?
Yeah, it's so funny when you have to, first of all, I need to be honest. I used to always say to people, I try to be very real and transparent about who I am and the flaw. And I guess we all do, but I used to have all these qualifiers and just say, I'm going to be really blunt. And now I just say I'm going to be Kijua, so just be clear on the fact that, I don't know how to be anybody else but me, and this is who I am 24 hours a day. So I will say that it is very difficult to choose one scholar. Even when I saw one of the questions and I was like, okay, so let me try to prioritize. And often when I'm applying for positions or just out in the world talking about needing to be succinct in terms of talking about who I most identify with in terms of my salient identity right now is engaged pedagogy, that philosophy of interactive teaching, participatory learning. I think it's informed by the fact that I hold a PhD in higher education, but I'm a high school dropout. I started college as a high school dropout at a 2-year institution, and that really kind of informed my own perspective in terms of pedagogy. And so there are a lot of scholars. Liberatory pedagogy, critical pedagogy, radical pedagogy. I could use lots and lots of examples. The critical pedagogy reader is kind of I guess for lack of a better word, Bible, or my text that I use, and there are a lot of people in that. So obviously Freire, I don't know, I could just go on and on. I can even think about different disciplines. I struggle. I'm a recovering sociologist, so that, I need to own that a little bit too. So yeah, I would say there are a number of people, Gloria Nzaldua, I don't know, I feel like the list is so long it's hard to be comprehensive. I'm also greatly informed by literary scholars because most often in terms of oppressed and marginalized people, literature has been a place where we've been able to fully express ourselves, often when the academy rejected us. And so literature, like poetry, those are the spaces where we were able to be innovative and creative and radical. And so, there's a whole lot of people in literature, but Alice Walker, I don't know, I struggle with this one, I will be honest with you. And I think a lot of us would struggle with this one, right? A lot of us could say we've been informed by multiple perspectives. So I don't know that I answered it. I apologize.
No apologies necessary. That's your truth. Thank you.
So I think I have the opposite answer to Kijua. When I think about scholars that I draw knowledge from and inspire me, I think in some ways it's really challenging because the way that I view my role and my work, because I sort of identify as practitioner first, I feel like that voice in the literature isn't as present, and I think that's something that really stands out to me, right? That the voices that you hear, the things that you read in published journals, are not the voices of practitioners. And, even just sort of in practice, as I talk to my colleagues about oh, I'm doing this research project, you just sort of see their eyes glaze over, and they're like, how do you have time to do that? What are you talking about? And so I think that in and of itself is my own inspiration, I guess, because it really motivates me to want to bring more of the voice of practitioners into what's out there, even when it is hard to find the time, to be able to do that in a way that is critical and is contributing to a base of knowledge. And I think where I feel inspired to add is adding the voice people that are doing both. What does it mean to be a scholar practitioner? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what I'm navigating, and always looking for people who are able to do that well.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, Delia, because I think perhaps that is where the disconnect is, mm-hmm. with folks understanding the importance of critical scholarship in their work, right? Because perhaps they don't hear their own voice or represented in what is out there right now. So maybe just to tease that out a little bit, Delia, going back to what you said, what would scholarship with a practitioner-centered voice sound like to you, or read like to you? Because I guess I'm still trying to get a sense of what that would look like.
Yeah, well, I think from like the practitioner side, I think when you hear like research, I think there's like a certain when you hear like research and scholarship, like you think of a certain kind of thing, and I think part of it needs to be reframed around, this is a process of inquiry, right? And I would hope that all of us, like in our practice as student affairs practitioners, are like asking questions and inquiring and trying to find answers. And I want that to be answers like with the S, because there's not one answer to all of these questions. And so I think helping people in general kind of think about the ways that they are already asking these questions in their work. It might not look like capital R like research or capital S like scholarship, but mm-hmm. I think in practice everyone is like asking questions, and so I think trying to blur the line a little more, and seeing more ways to like have those voices be out there in knowledge. I think a lot about the difference between quantitative and qualitative, and I think for all of this so much of it is centered in qualitative, in the narratives, and thinking about the stories of our students and their experiences, and I think finding ways to help give that legitimacy. I think when I on our campus, people really like to hear about like numbers, and I think that gives a certain validity to quantitative research or like survey results, but I don't think that always tells the whole story, and especially when we think about the experiences of any marginalized population, thinking about students of color, especially for me, given my role, that doesn't tell any of the story, and so I think finding ways to help people broadly understand, the ways that the narratives are part of, scholarship and research. I think, that is one step, in helping to bring more of, what we do as student affairs practitioners into like the realm of like scholarship.
Awesome. Can I just add one thing to this, because and I'm gonna try not to be long-winded with this one, but I really, really want to like affirm what you're saying about just kind of, I strongly identify as a practitioner. I have no need, I identify as a scholar practitioner, but I have no need to privilege like the fact that I'm, also a person who teaches in the classroom, because I feel like learning is happening all over the academy. And I think historically in student affairs, we tend to, and I think a lot of higher ed students go through this both in the master's and PhD process, is trying to figure out like, where will I have the most agency, the most autonomy? Where will people listen to me? Mm-hmm. And where will people validate the fact that I have something to offer, my contribution, not just as an individual, right? So not even just showing up in a self-preservation type of way, but really showing up for a group of people, for marginalized and oppressed people. And those of us who are really engaged in critical scholarship, that's always our struggle, and that's a struggle we should name, because it's a true, it's truly authentic to our experience. And I think it's funny, like Dean Spade, I do a lot of work around kind of gender inclusion. I'm at a gendered institution, so you can imagine kind of historically, but Dean was here with us helping us do our work about 7 years ago around trans inclusion. And one of the things I listened to him talk about is just like that pull from being a person who was, and I don't know, if you don't know anything about Dean Spade, he created with some others, the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. So had been really focused on advocacy and agency around trans people and lots of inclusion work, and then moved into a faculty position.
Mm-hmm.
But still sees himself very much as an activist scholar. And so what ends up happening is you worry a lot about, your ability to have, like, the voice be lifted in ways that isn't, I mean, I don't know, I'm going to use the word sellout. I'm sure I could use a lot better words, but, not even just the perception of you being a sellout, but just really staying true to what it is, the work that you're trying to do. And it is hard to do that, both in a classroom and outside of a classroom within the academy. So I love that Delia is like, hey, like, I really don't want to have to, like, privilege one over another, because I think it really is a struggle constantly, and that quantitative qualitative struggle becomes a part of that as well. Like, what is validated? Because I find that where I see practitioners really showing up is in presentations at ACPA or NASPA. That's where I see scholarship happening all the time, and new professionals, develop in terms of scholarship. Seasoned professionals, like, we don't always have time to, like, go out and submit 5 iterations to a journal and have it be edited 10. That's the beauty of what your journal is doing. I think is, like, really trying to lift voices that would not be lifted in historical journals that have been historically exclusionary, and not for, not just for reasons of, often criteria and rubrics are used, but those criteria and rubrics are rooted in a supremacist system. I hate to sound like really, but they're rooted in a
go there, yeah.
understanding that interrupting the usual requires you to think outside the box about whose voices are lifted and who's validated, and what it means to be a scholar practitioner. I think that's a struggle we all have, and it's one that we need to continue to push against in all the most radical ways that we can, and even within ourselves, question it when, interrogate it.
Yeah. Yeah, both great insights, and for the record, I didn't pay Kajua to give us that plug.
Exactly.
But like, thanks for the
I follow the journal, so I could.
And I would hope that both of you are strongly considering. I know, Delia, there's a piece that you're co-authored that's coming through. But yeah, definitely, like, that was the vision with our journal, and, like, we're only in our 2nd year. And I don't know if y'all saw the special issue that came out, but that was also just a direct response to the community need of centering students' voices around the Black Lives Matter protests that were happening on campus in solidarity with Mizzou, right? And so, like, I think we talk about the voices that are valued are often the administrations and how they have responded or how they feel, and the media, eats it up, and but no one really looks to the students as experts, but rather a lot of administrators see them as, people who are bratty or entitled and just complaining because, they have nothing better to do. So I think, it is so important but also on, on the administrator level, like, this struggle that you're talking about staying true to the work that you do rather than doing the work that just gets validated, right? Because validation doesn't come from a system that is built for the marginalized. So I don't know if y'all are comfortable speaking frankly to, what are some of the challenges that, really become a barrier for you to stay true to your work. I know, the quantitative thing is a little bit of on the research side, but on a practitioner side, where do you see those barriers mainly coming from?
That's a really big question. Just need a minute.
I'll jump into one piece. And then definitely, I think it's been really interesting for me to be, I've always held a few positions, like Title IX coordinator. So my last job, I was the Associate Vice President for Diversity and Associate Dean of Students and Title IX coordinator. So you hear 3 titles. I was Associate Dean of Students, I was Chief Diversity Officer, and I was Title IX coordinator, which is clearly 3 jobs. 3 full-time jobs at a lot of institutions, but I'm at a small college, 900 student enrollment, and obviously resources are stretched. And I think that what happens, at least this is what my friends who know kind of this kind of stuff, understand, is that because we're called in a way to, a lot of us come into this work from our own kind of experience of feeling as though we need to get in there and change. Like, we're, maybe we were student activists or we were students who like were really doing work, and we saw like, okay, here's an opportunity for me to be on the other side of like, being positionally in a place where I could do the work that I want to do, but do it in the name of students and for students. So that's how we start sometimes, and then we suddenly look up and a lot of things are around us, and budget and resources and staffing become an issue. And so I think that becomes the struggle. It's like, how do I continue to do the work that I feel is good? How do I make sure I can go to sleep every night feeling like I've done my best, but also not kill myself in the process, So I know for Title IX, for example, I took that very seriously. I cared deeply about all of those people that I was working with, and because of that, I spent a lot more time on it than I probably would have had it been a job to me. And I think that's hard as critical scholars when we get in, or as people who, scholar practitioners, we get into some of this work because we really do love it, and it can pull on us in ways that it might not pull on someone else who just sees it as like, this is what I need to do, every day. I care about it, but it's like really just something I'm doing because it's a good thing for me to do. And I'm not trying to privilege one or the other. I'm just saying I think that's a struggle. That's a real struggle, and that is a struggle that contributes to our ability to participate in scholarship sometimes. But it's also a struggle because we do really care about modeling for people how to value the importance of taking care of yourself. I'm not going to just use the word balance or wellness. I think those are important, but for me, that's been a real struggle. I could have just said no, like, oh, okay, I won't be the diversity officer, I won't be the Title IX coordinator, I won't be the associate dean of students, but I love doing each one of them. But at some point I started to see that it was really just not healthy, and it wasn't allowing for the type of liberation I wanted to have on campus to happen. And I also have to be willing to be corrected all the time. I'm always encouraged. Students are really mad at me right now, and it's because I made a mistake, and I needed to own that, and I need to give them the space to say, you made a mistake. It's just important.
Thank you.
So I definitely agree with with what a lot of Kajua just said. I think like in addition, like I think I struggle with wanting to take on everything, right? Because I think in many ways, like I am in a unique position. I have the ability to be engaged, in research and scholarship, and I have the ability to, be creating new programs and, developing new initiatives on campus. But I think, to be able to step back and to be able to say, just because I can, it doesn't mean that I should, right? Because I have, 10 ideas, sitting right here of things that I would like to do, but that doesn't mean that I need to do them because, I think I would be working, 26 hours a day, if I did that. I think the other piece that, I've really tried to remind myself is that I want to find ways for myself to be continually learning. And I think, as someone who only recently emerged from maybe never being a student again, I think I want to make sure that I am remembering that, because clearly I don't know everything, and clearly there's many more ways where I can continue to grow and evolve. And I think for me, that actually is why I want to have research and scholarship on high up there on my priority list, because it makes me go back and delve into literature and read what's being published in journals now, and not just have read what I read when I was writing a lit review. So I think that needs to be on our radars a little bit, because otherwise everything else just fills up the day, and you don't have any time or motivation to sit down and be like, what was just published, or I should read this chapter now. And so finding whatever way works for you, to make sure that you're continually exposing yourself to new thoughts and new books and new literature. So
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, prioritizing is key. So for those who are viewing, you can submit questions via the Google Hangout, or you can use our hashtag JCSHESA chat. Liliana, my counterpart, is watching, and we will throw out the questions that you have for our great panelists, Delia and Kijua, at any point throughout our conversation here. So, because we're about 30 minutes in, so I want to make sure that we're opening an avenue for our audience to ask questions. But kind of to transition us a little bit, when we think about critical scholarship, I think it gets really heady, and I think people can get frightened and just completely like the glazed over look, like you said earlier. And so, can both of you kind of help us, really talk about how critical scholarship impacts or influences your practice? Like perhaps a tangible example of how you would approach something differently because of your critical perspective versus one without. So that might help our audience just kind of get a better sense.
I feel like I always go first, Delia, so I really want to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I
don't want to put you on the spot, but I just want to give you this.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I think for me, like when I think about the way that critical scholarship affects how I go about my work, I think wanting to think about like the role of scholarship beyond producing knowledge, and so I think all of us, and I think me, myself included, really need to remember that the goal of this isn't. The journal article isn't the goal, right? Even if it's in amazing journals like we have here, but that's not the goal, right? The goal is really, for me, and I think through a critical lens, is about creating change, right, and disrupting narratives. And so I think remembering that I think is really important, and I think I feel like that should. In my perspective, really resonate with the practitioners, right? Because if you're the ones who are with the students and hearing their stories, just sort of like in a practitioner way, you're hearing it and you're seeing that if there's ways to understand more about the ways that critical scholarship can use that and help, give voice and expose the stories of our students, I think that becomes really meaningful because there are ways in that in creating change, right? So I think those are the things, I think about that a lot in the ways that we approach, our work, like with Asian American students in particular here, like at the Asian American Center, about what are the things that we are doing that helps empower our students and gives them voice and a sense of agency on campus and within student life, on our campus.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to use a couple of specific examples, and one example that I want to use is just recently with the incredible Making America Great. I mean, when I say incredible, that I'm problematizing, but this notion of making America great, which I really didn't. My colleague is the one who I didn't know that this was the slogan that, Voldemort. That's the only first way I can describe him. I don't really want to say names. I mean, I will say names, but I really don't want to say his name. You got it. Just I didn't even know that. I mean, I guess I should have known, but I just stopped listening to him in that way a long time ago. So. I listen so that I can understand, so I can know what's being said, but I don't listen, to that hyperbole. But anyway, so I'm getting way off because once you start talking about Trump, you just okay. So having said that, when he was really coming out, I mean, probably after Paris more so is very convenient, but before that, against Muslims. I mean, he'd always been doing that against all people, right? But it was really important for us to pay attention to what was happening for our Muslim students at our institution, not at Agnes Scott. So we can be self-congratulatory. We're very diverse. We were named by Time Magazine the #2 most diversified college and university in the nation since 1990. Among all colleges and universities, we're the #2 in Time. So, it was all over our Twitter. Everybody's so excited. But what does that I mean, I feel like cussing right now. I'm on Twitter. I'm visible, but I mean, what does that actually mean for students? That's one thing, right? So it's great that we can say that. It's great that we can tweet about that. But how does that actually manifest for the student experience at Agnes Scott? That's really what I always push back at my colleagues about. But I use my voice, but I want our students' voices to be centered. And most often student voices are marginalized. And it's very easy as an administrator to marginalize a student voice because they're not here for the entire lifeblood of the institution. So it's like, oh, well, they're only sophomores. What could they know about North? My nephew's a junior at Northeastern, so I think it's really funny. So like, they've only been here a couple years. They don't get it. Like that's what we're talking about, minimizing that voice. That's why I was so proud of the journal for like lifting those voices and being very intentional about that. I'm not trying to continue to plug the journal. I'm just saying I think that was really a great thing. But so Muslim students, for example, people were like, oh, well, our Muslim students feel safe here. We've done a really good job. So I'm like, okay, well, first of all, let's find out. Without like putting the pressure on them, let's find out. And one of my colleagues who's the director of diversity programs told me a story about a Muslim student saying that she felt okay at Agnes Scott, but she wore a hijab, and when she would get on the MARTA, which was our subway system, and go to another institution, she was being harassed, and it was making her feel like she wanted to not be in her own skin, that she was starting to weep about it and really feeling the, really serious effects psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually around what it meant to be Muslim in America. So how is Agnes Scott showing up for that student? So one of the things that we did really quickly is we organized a dinner at the president's house to say, we want to stand for you. We want to know how you want us to stand for you. We didn't go there to tokenize. We said, we want to invite you to the president's house for dinner, and we want to do it very proactively, understanding that that you live in a hostile world toward Muslims right now. Now I have a certain agency to be able to ask the president to do this, obviously. We also took a stand against Islamophobia very publicly as part of our Martin Luther King Week. So we asked everyone in the dining hall to go together and make public stands against Islamophobia. We needed to be really thoughtful about that. So that's an example of, like, for example, asking Muslim students to tell Agnes Scott what we can do better, and not assuming that just because the bubble here that they're in we think is safe, that they feel it's safe, number one, and that there's not more we can do. So can we reach out to the spokesperson at Subway, the subway station, MARTA is our subway system, and say, what kinds, I don't know, are there things we can do that touch students' lives even beyond our campus? And so we looked at town-gown relations. We looked at all kinds of things. So that's really important. Be very specific about your work and your activism. The other example I'll give is trans and gender non-binary students. When I started Agnes Scott, my colleague Susan Marine, who does incredible work, her dissertation was looking at student affairs professionals and how they treated trans students at women's colleges. She looked at this like 7-8 years ago. And I thought it was incredibly important as a student affairs administrator to think about how might I be participating in the oppression of trans students just by coming to work every day and not thinking critically about what they need? And how can I ask them about that without tokenizing them and not making them feel like, oh, I don't want to tell you as a dean that I see you as oppressive. So I had to do some very proactive things to say, I need to speak truth to power, recognize that I am a dean, and recognize that it's not comfortable to tell me that I'm wrong. So what do I need to do? Do I need to have anonymous surveys? So just being very intentional about how you collect student voices and how you do it in a way that does not make them feel like you're asking them to educate you. Like saying, look, I know I need to do my own work, but I want you to know that I will be corrected, I will be challenged, and I will be open to that. And so I think that's just, there's lots of, sometimes we just act like we have no power to make change, but we have a lot of power to make change. I don't mean power in terms of dominant. I mean power in terms of, really institutionalizing what it means to be a scholar, a critical scholar.
Thank you.
And I think just to jump off of what you were saying, I think some of it is also around asking. I heard you say so many times, you're just asking, and I think honestly, I don't think students get asked enough in a real way. What is your experience like on campus? What are you struggling with right now? And I really do think across lots of contexts, when I've really asked that question in a really open way where it's really clear to the students that I want to listen, they have so much to say, and I think that just needs to be done more in a really authentic way.
Yeah, I'm definitely sitting with that because I also I think about the idea of representing students at the tables that we're given a seat at, right? But how do we do it in a manner that is like not, you know, not like co-opting their voices almost. I'm struggling with that because like at what point am I starting to make my own assumptions about various identities who I have no experience with but want to make sure get considered, right? As someone who's privileged enough to be at the table. So I don't know if that's something that y'all struggle with as well, or have found a way to kind of navigate when you're in meetings where students aren't present, and how do you kind of balance all those narratives?
Well, I think some of it does sort of rest where you started. Juliana was saying like we can't assume to know, you know, sort of what the questions that students want to be asked are, right? Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of it really revolves around creating spaces where students are empowered to really find their own way around this, right? It's not just about, you know, bringing you know, the narrative of, you know, Asian American students into, you know, the VP for Student Affairs office, right? I don't think that's fully it. You know, I think some of it is about engaging students in a process where they're able to, you know, A, self-identify, you know, what the issues are, you know, and then B, you know, work collectively like on finding ways to address those things, whether it is through like working with administration, whether it is, you know, even within, you know, just their own lives, you know, as students, as people with relationships with other people, you know, what are the ways that they are willing to be part of this, right, and engaged in finding ways to create change.
Mm. Thanks. Kijua, I don't know if you had anything to add.
Not right now. I mean, I'm thinking about that one. You know, I think, I don't know. I mean, I would agree with you, Juliana. I think it's interaction.
Hello.
And so, yeah, I think when it becomes a problem in terms of like being an administrator or a staff member is that sometimes we want so badly to look competent and skilled for reasons related to survival, particularly as people of color. You know, I have definitely suffered from people not believing that because I'm like very much show up as myself, if you can't tell, in terms of like, you know, clothing, whatever. I just show up as me. You know, I might talk about things in ways that are not neat and organized, and there's a certain way that you're supposed to be professional as a vice president or as a dean or as a director. You know, people kind of, I mean, I remember once early on, I had someone say to me, you know, I was a director, and they were like, so, you know, now that you're a director, I just want to tell you, like, this is how bell hooks. Because I remember being a young person and reading that she decided to say, like, excuse my language, I'm sorry, I'm on a Google Hangout, but okay. So, like, forget about footnotes, sorry. You know, like, I mean, you know, that was radical. Like, I mean, you know, and I mean, obviously she paid the price. You do pay a price. And I try to tell students that, like, I pay a price for being as free as I am. I pay a price.
Kijua, I think we'll.
Price for being the person that cost to say how to be better at who you should be in positions. That's why you have to be really careful about the positions and spaces you occupy, because you in your effort to try to do the good work, you will sometimes listen to that because it feels better. And I feel like we do that with students. We'll tell students, I know that you like to show up this way, but you're trying to get that Fulbright scholarship, or you're trying to be the first in your family to do X, Y, Z. So you might need to modify. And I just think
The connection.
It's a bias and our own need to perpetuate hegemonic that we need to stop. And so I have to do that. to push myself to be free, but I actually understand that there's a cost and that it might mean that people won't see me as capable of being in the positions. And as long as that's the case, I have to be able to live with that cost, you know. So I feel like that's a challenge I see with students, and even myself as an administrator. But was black, but it was actually Lives Matter. I probably get another. So he was saying this. He said that they would look at the pamphlets and like some of the demands the students would send in, and professors or staff members would be focused on the grammar. And it's like, okay, like yeah, I guess they could be a little bit more polished, but these kids were probably working on this at 3 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
and they're trying to do this in spite of their exams, but they're trying to also graduate from college. Some BS, and you all need to do X, Y, Z. To make sure we feel valued. And does grammar really matter in that? No, the institution.
Kajua.
So, but people will diminish your value by saying you should have spelled that better. Okay, I guess. But we have to be careful. We reify when we do that. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking. Sorry. I get really heated about this.
I know, and you said so many great things, but your video feed kept going in and out, so I'm like,
Oh, sorry. I thought I went rogue. So.
Yeah. No, not at all. You should not apologize. I appreciate you speaking your truth, and I think something that you said that really hit me was like the cost, right? Of the decision that you make to show up, how you do show up, and recognizing that the environments that we are in or the positions that we're in don't necessarily welcome all of us, right? They perhaps only welcome parts of us or in certain ways. So I think that I appreciate you naming that very much. So I don't know, Delia, is there anything you wanted to add or? Wow. I'm just like sitting with that. Yeah. So no questions from the hashtag, right? Okay. So our audience is kind of like quiet today. They're just kind of chilling and enjoying what's being talked about, I guess. So with our last 15 minutes, kind of want to let the both of you speak to what you see the role of critical scholarship in higher education institutions, like what do you and or beyond, right? And I know we spoke about it a little bit initially with how it impacts your work outside of the campus, but what do you see as the role for critical scholarship in in your current context and beyond our actual institutions of higher ed? Oh, can you hear the question? I'll repeat myself, Kajua. Mike, can you hear me now, Kajua?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to go to the last question that I sent all of you, which is, what do you see as the role of critical scholarship in higher education institutions and or beyond? And if you can speak a little bit about the context that you're in, right? Because obviously it's different state to state or institution to institution, that would certainly be helpful.
So I can jump in. So I think for me, I think the role of critical scholarship, I think it really is, I think it really is around identifying the narrative, as a part of data, right? And I think finding ways to really make the experiences of marginalized populations seen and acknowledged in sort of naming, and my work mostly focuses around race and racism, obviously not exclusively, but for example, naming race as something that is defining, for our college students' experiences, and that it's not just something that is on the side, right? Because it is for a lot of our students. Yeah. So I think if for using critical scholarship as a way to bring more awareness and visibility to those experiences, I think are really important. I think for me, I also think a lot about process, right? So that it's not only about, you know, the outcome of this, but I think it's really important to acknowledge the process, you know, in creating knowledge and scholarship. So, you know, one of the things that I have found really just inspiring and, you know, really important in informing the way that I go about scholarship in my work is is the concept of participatory action research. So really engaging students as the researchers and not just as the subjects, right? And I think in all of this, that's something that's really important to think about, especially for marginalized populations, whether it's, you know, women, you know, trans community, you know, students of color. Like, I think finding ways for them not to be the objects of study, but for having them to be part of that. And I think, you know, as a student affairs practitioner, I think that's been a really clear way to be able to bring research into my work. And so, you know, for us, you know, right now, like, what scholarship looks like is, you know, doing a participatory action research project with, you know, a group of students, and for me, seeing that it is really transformative, you know, for them to be part of the process, for them to say, and for the students that I'm working with, I've heard so many of them say, you know, we hear about research, you know, we read about these things like in science, right? You know, for them not to sort of see that they can be part of this, right, in ways that are meaningful to their lives. You know, I had a student say to me, you know, oh, you know, we do like research like on like cells and you look for like results, but for them to kind of see that there is a different way that they can be engaged in meaningful research that actually relates to their lives, I think is really amazingly empowering, and I think really like complements like the work of student affairs from what I define as the work of student affairs as being really impactful and actually like all together, like it's all part of the same package, right? We're empowering the students, we're engaging them in this process, and we're giving them tools for sharing, you know, their narrative. So I think there's, I've found a lot of, you know, inspiration around bringing all of those different things together, and I think that for me is the way that, you know, using this a critical scholarship lens really can help to bridge, you know, the gaps between what is the perceived gaps between, you know, research and practice.
Thank you. I love that.
I think I would answer the question very similar, actually. I think, should I go?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, technology is great. I love it. But I think I would answer the question. I think that placing students at the center is really important. I know, like, one thing that was really important to the work we were doing a few years ago around, you know, I talked about like NASPA and ACPA being like really important places for, you know, scholarship production around being a practitioner. And I still see that. I mean, I really do value those organizations, even within states. You know, our organization, Georgia College Personnel Association, which is our state entity, or regional organizations. I think it's really, really important for us to continue as critical scholars to be engaged in putting the work out there that we're doing, documenting the stories for other people who are trying to do this work, both the successes we've had and the failures we've had. I think that's incredibly important, and where we've made mistakes. But I really value having students in those spaces. So when I do a presentation and I say I'm going to do something on, for example, the examples I can give that are specific is, you know, a few years ago I wanted to document the stories of students from a multiplicity of identities, so multiracial, different student, you know, within groups. I was looking at like kind of how the institution had transformed over a period of time, and so I took those students to the National Women's Studies Association. We did a presentation together, a presentation that involves how trans student advocacy has happened at Agnes Scott. I always want a trans student to present, but it's not just validate kind of my work as an administrator. It's more so that their voice is centered in that space. Sometimes we can't afford to do that, right? That's just the budget piece, which is why I think like doing stuff on the state level is really important. But always making sure that students, and one of my mentors was a woman named Mary Beth Gasman, who's really well known for like work she's done in higher ed in terms of publications. If you look at, I mean, she's very well published, very prolific, but a lot of her work, especially in her first 5 years, was all with students. Mm-hmm. And I was one of her doctoral students at Georgia State when she was there before she went off to Pennsylvania. She always had her students. She was a young faculty member, not tenured, and she took a lot of risks with her students. She always published with us. And most of my first publications really came from working with her. She was not who she is now. She was just a young, emerging scholar. And so I think it's really important. I think sometimes we forget that students, that's why I'm not going to keep, blowing at the journal, but I think that that's what was powerful, is that I don't really want to be in a space where my students aren't welcome and my students can't speak for themselves and they can't present nationally. So when we did a presentation last year on women's colleges and trans student inclusion, the student who helped me change all the policies around athletic students in this space was the student who went to that conference, so that he could have the opportunity to talk about what it was like for him to transition. And he was very honest about what his experience was like with administrators. We can't be afraid for them to come in those spaces and talk about where we made mistakes or failed. So I think critical scholars constantly need to be thinking about how is your student voice centered in a way that is not just congratulating the work you're doing, but also recognizing where you still need to grow.
Yes. Very great thing to leave our audience members with. And we didn't have a question, but we had a comment from Grace. They are saying that they want to take a moment to thank all of you for being so honest and for your willingness to be vulnerable in this space. It has been very insightful. So take it for what it's worth. But I know I'm certainly thankful that both of you have been very candid and truthful. And I know that Liliana is next to me saying, she's like, yes, I like that, So I'm sure there's a lot of snaps, if we could give snaps, as y'all have been talking. So in our last 5 minutes, I don't know if there was anything that perhaps I didn't get to that you were hoping to speak about with regards to this topic. Any last comments? Because I think really the purpose of this webinar is to really expand the purpose of our journal, right? To not just center our work around things that are published, but really to highlight voices of scholar practitioners like yourselves, and to really bridge that perceived gap, right, of between research and practice. And so I really thank both of you for taking the time. But if there's any final word or a word of advice to people who might be listening in or have no idea where do I even start with critical scholarship and my practice, I would love if you all could share a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think for I think some of the people that I work with, I think when they see they think about scholarship or journal articles, I think I want to name imposter syndrome as something that's out there and really real for people, and I don't want that to be the thing that holds us back from doing things that can create change and give voice to our students. So I think not being afraid of that, because I think if you don't think that you're seasoned enough, and even for me, I had asked Juliana, I don't think I should be on this panel, but just to acknowledge that and to say I'm not a scholar, and for me to say that, obviously someone over there thought that I was, but just trying to get over that and working together about building each other up so that we can say, yes, actually, I am a scholar practitioner. Thank you, Juliana. And to other people, how do we continue to build each other up? Because I think, I think journals and, NASPA and ACPA, I think those things are important. But I also want to acknowledge that those spaces, and I think, Kajua, you mentioned earlier, they're built around a system that actually does continually put us down and continue to marginalize our voices in many ways. So not let, rejections from journals put you down, or not being able to present at NASPA, that doesn't mean that your voice isn't meaningful or needed. It doesn't make you less of a scholar. So I know that all of us need to continue to work on that and really finding ways to support each other in doing the work that we really care about, not getting the accolades and things.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And then one thing I would add to that, there's two things I thought about when my colleague was first talking. First of all, I think it's amazing that you didn't think you should be on this webinar. So I'm glad you overcame that and did it anyway, because I think that you're absolutely right that a lot of times we will exclude ourselves before other people have even thought about excluding us, because we're used to being excluded. So it's almost like it's this like vicious cycle where we don't see ourselves because that's not who we see as a scholar. We don't think we've done enough ever. But other people in other groups, they don't really have those kind of issues, right? They kind of just say, well, if I was invited, somebody, you know. So it's like, I really think that's important. I think it's really important to name that. I think it's also important for us to challenge ourselves and make sure that we're not participating in that notion of who is a scholar too. And again, like, you know, I loved the one thing that you said at the beginning, Delia, that was like, you said, I'm a mother. I think it's so important that we bring our full and whole selves to the spaces that we're in, and recognize that what some people see as a liability, we should never see that way. We have to have the deepest truth about ourselves and understand that the things that other people might hold as their truths around things that are like, maybe you shouldn't mention that, or how is that relevant? I mean, you know, some of the best scholars I know are parents. Some of the best activists I know are parents, and that absolutely informs their experience, and it absolutely shapes their perspective, and it sometimes influences their ability to participate in different ways. But again, participation is privilege, you know, so we have to really interrupt that as often as we can. And so I would add that. And the last thing I would add is that I think as scholar practitioners, we have to really be in solidarity with each other. And I would say that's to any graduate students in the room, that you really have to challenge this notion of competition. It is very natural to the human experience to feel as though you have to prove your worth, you know, because it's not, I wouldn't say it's natural, it's very socialized, right? That's my recovering sociologist. For us to say, like, I have to prove that I'm as good or better than someone else. But every time you see that rear its ugly head, I challenge you to interrupt it, because if we don't find solidarity with each other, if we don't try to stop undermining each other, then the system wins. And I have to challenge my activist students around that, like, you know, be accountable with mercy, hold each other accountable, but recognize that people are bringing their full selves in the space, and that means that sometimes they're going to have to not participate in certain things in the same way you participate. That doesn't mean they don't value it, doesn't mean they don't care about it, it just means that they can't participate in the same level that you do. And that's okay.
I love that. So thank you both so much. I am so appreciative that I have both of you as, you know, sisters in scholarship, and I so appreciate you lending your voices to disrupting hegemony. So hopefully, you know, you both got something out of this space as well. Thank you for giving me and Liliana your time.
Thank you, guys.
And we will be in touch.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.